I never thought I could be the type of girl someone would notice in a way that mattered. But when I first saw Jake at the campus library, I felt something shift inside me like a jolt I had no control over. He was sitting at a corner table, completely absorbed in his laptop, headphones on, messy hair falling over his eyes, and a notebook filled with scribbles beside him, with a coffee cup that looked untouched for hours. I had seen him around before with a group of friends, but we never spoke until that day, when I accidentally bumped into him while reaching for the same book. Our hands collided, and we both jumped back slightly, his brown eyes locking onto mine, and for a second, I could swear time paused. "Sorry," I mumbled, laughing nervously. He raised an eyebrow and smirked. "It's okay. I guess you owe me coffee now," he teased. I laughed, even though my heart was hammering. I couldn't believe he was actually talking to me. I tried to play it cool. "I don't owe you anything," I said teasingly, but inside I was melting. He laughed and invited me to sit down, and before I knew it, we were talking about everything from classes to music to the weirdest memes we had seen lately. It felt effortless, like we had known each other forever, and for the first time, I felt seen, noticed, and slightly dangerous in a way I liked. But there was a shadow looming over everything. I soon learned from casual mentions that Jake had a longtime crush on a girl named Sabrina. She was the kind of girl who seemed untouchable, perfect grades, perfect smile, perfect life. Everyone noticed her, and he had been obsessed with her for months, maybe years. I didn't know exactly how long, but I could tell from the way his eyes softened when he mentioned her name that it wasn't just a passing thing. I didn't want to interfere or feel manipulative, but I also didn't want to disappear from his orbit. Because every time we laughed together, every time his shoulder brushed mine, every time he leaned in closer than necessary, I felt sparks I didn't want to ignore, and I could tell he felt them too, though he didn't fully realize it yet. I started leaving little hints that weren't obvious, like recommending books or shows she wouldn't like, mentioning inside jokes that only he would appreciate, and making subtle jokes that reminded him of things we had talked about before. I even joined study groups he was in, or accidentally bumped into him at the coffee shop he frequented. I had to be careful because if he realized I was trying too hard, it could ruin everything. The delicate balance of our new friendship and the way he looked at me now seemed fragile. I also made sure to show him sides of me that were unique and interesting, my quirky obsessions, my sarcastic humor, my messy art sketches, the things that made me different from Sabrina, the girl who seemed perfect but distant. I wanted him to see someone real, someone worth noticing, someone worth choosing. Slowly, I noticed changes I didn't think were possible. He started texting me first, asking for my opinion on random things, like what to eat or which movie to watch. I noticed him laughing more at my jokes, and sometimes catching himself staring at me when he thought I wasn't looking. Sometimes I would catch a glimpse of him scrolling past her photos on social media, a flicker of doubt in his expression. I wondered if he was starting to compare me without even realizing it, and the thought excited me and scared me at the same time. But I knew I couldn't rush him. He was loyal and stubborn. If I pushed too hard, he would retreat to the familiar safety of Sabrina like a shield. I also had to watch my own feelings because every time he smiled at me or lightly brushed my hand, I felt my chest tighten like my entire body knew it had been waiting for him. And if he ever rejected me after all this effort, I didn't know how I would cope. But I couldn't stop now. I had to see it through, not for anyone else but for me, because I wanted to feel wanted in the same way I wanted him, and the idea that I could make him quit his old crush for me seemed impossible yet thrilling. Somewhere deep inside, I knew I had to try the impossible, or live forever wondering if I could have been the one who finally made him choose me. After weeks of subtle games and careful timing, I started noticing more concrete changes in Jake. His friends jokingly teased him about how distracted he seemed, and he laughed nervously, but I could see it. He was thinking about me more than he wanted to admit, and I knew that meant my plan was working. Nothing was straightforward, though, because Sabrina wasn't just a distant name, she was everywhere. She was in class with us, in the library across tables where I tried to sit. She always had this effortless charm that made people gravitate to her, and Jake never tried to hide it when he smiled at her or nodded at something she said. At first, it was painful to watch. I would sit pretending to read a book while my mind screamed at me that he could never notice me the same way he noticed her. But then I realized I wasn't invisible. I had his attention, even when he thought he didn't, and slowly, I began to step into the space between them. I found excuses to text him about things only we shared, like a joke about a meme we had laughed at weeks ago, or a comment on an assignment we both struggled with. I noticed him replying faster, sometimes adding emojis or little comments that were only for me, little details that Sabrina would never notice because she didn't see him in the same way I did. One day, we were walking across campus when she appeared around the corner and smiled at him like he was the center of her world. My stomach twisted with jealousy. He greeted her, and for a split second, everything seemed like old patterns. But then he turned to me mid-conversation and laughed at something I had said about my messy art sketches. His eyes lit up in a way they never did for her, and I could see her pause. She was used to being the center of attention, but this time, she noticed that Jake's focus had shifted slightly toward me, not entirely, but enough to unsettle her. I felt a surge of triumph, but kept my composure. I couldn't let him see how much this small victory meant. I wanted him to choose me because he genuinely wanted to, not because I made him. I started spending more time with him in ways that felt natural, like joining the club he had recently signed up for and pretending I was interested in the same topic, only because it gave us more one-on-one moments. I also discovered that he confided small things to me, things he would never mention to Sabrina, like how stressed he was about an upcoming test, how he hated a certain professor, and how he wanted to learn to play the guitar but was too embarrassed to try. Every time he told me something personal, I felt like he was handing me a piece of his world, pieces she didn't know existed. I started noticing tiny habits he had when he was around me, the way he fiddled with his necklace when he was nervous, the way he laughed differently when I made a sarcastic joke, the way he lingered slightly longer when our hands accidentally touched. All of it built a tension neither of us could ignore. One night, he invited me to a group hangout, but Sabrina wasn't coming, and I felt a thrill in my chest because, for the first time, we had an evening together with no one else around, just casual conversation and inside jokes only we could understand. We ended up walking back to our dorms together, and the air was different. It was charged with a quiet electricity. He leaned on me slightly as we walked, and when he laughed at a story I told, I felt the world shrink down to just us. Even in that moment, I reminded myself to be patient. I knew that breaking his old crush wasn't about forcing him to notice me, it was about letting him see that what he had with me was more real, more exciting, more effortless than the fantasy he had built around Sabrina. I could sense it starting to work because, when he checked his phone mid-walk, it was obvious he hadn't even thought to text her. He was present with me, and it terrified me and thrilled me all at once. I wanted him to feel that same thrill every time he saw me, to question why he had ever imagined he could like someone else more than me. I started planning the next steps carefully, moments that would make him notice me more subtly, hints she couldn't compete with, little flares of personality that would draw his eyes to me. Slowly, I felt the impossible becoming possible, and a part of me couldn't believe that I was doing this. I was making him reconsider everything he had ever felt for someone else. And the thought exhilarated me and made me dizzy with fear. What if it went too far? What if he noticed my intentions and it all collapsed like a house of cards? Yet, at the same time, I knew I couldn't stop now. The momentum was mine, and every time he smiled at me, I felt that pull that made me believe that maybe, just maybe, I could make him quit his old crush for me. Things started changing in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. Jake's attention was becoming more obvious, and it thrilled me but also terrified me at the same time, because I knew how loyal he could be and how easily he could retreat if he felt pressured or caught in the wrong moment. One afternoon, we were sitting in the student lounge, just him and me, pretending to study but really talking about random things, when he suddenly looked at me with a kind of intensity that made my stomach flip. "Hey, can I ask you something?" he said casually, but his voice carried weight. "Sure," I replied a little too quickly, trying to sound calm, but inside I was panicking. Do you think I'm crazy for still thinking about someone I shouldn't?" I froze because I knew instantly he meant Sabrina, and my mind raced, trying to figure out how to respond without seeming desperate or too eager. "Not at all," I said carefully. "I think everyone has people they think about sometimes. It's normal." He nodded and then laughed nervously, but there was something in his eyes that made me realize he was already comparing me to her. He didn't fully understand it yet, but the seed was planted. Over the next few days, things got more complicated because Sabrina started noticing the shift too. She would smile at him in the hallways with this teasing look, and Jake would smile back politely, but there was something missing. The way he had always been enchanted by her charm seemed dulled when he was around me, and I could see the flicker of confusion across her face. I knew she had no idea what was happening, but she sensed it. And it made me feel a strange mix of guilt and triumph, because I wanted him to see me for who I was fully, and I wanted him to start realizing that what he felt for her was based on an image, not reality. I started subtly pushing the boundaries. I invited him to lunch alone under the guise of needing help with a class project. We walked through the quad, joking and laughing like we had done countless times before. But this time, the air felt heavier with unspoken things. I noticed him hesitating when his phone buzzed, probably a message from her, and he didn't glance at it. He was completely present with me, and it was intoxicating. I started revealing little secrets about myself, things I had never told anyone, like how I once got lost in the city for hours because I refused to ask for directions, and how I secretly loved writing cheesy fan fiction just to laugh at it later. Every time I shared something like that, he would smile at me in a way that made my chest tighten. I started noticing how he mirrored my gestures when we sat next to each other, how he adjusted his tone when he spoke to me, and how he lingered just a second longer than normal when our hands brushed accidentally. And the more he did these things, the more I felt the impossible pulling closer within reach. One evening, he invited me to a campus party. I wasn't sure if I should go because Sabrina was probably going to be there, and I didn't want to risk making things awkward, but I decided to take the chance, if only to see how he acted around her. When I arrived, the music was loud, the lights were dim, and I could see them across the room talking. Sabrina was leaning into him, laughing and touching his arm, and my stomach twisted, but then something happened I hadn't expected. Jake didn't respond the way he used to. He didn't lean in or laugh at her the same way he did before. Instead, he glanced at me from across the room and gave me a small smile that made my heart race. I noticed Sabrina stiffen slightly, as if she realized the shift she had taken for granted that he was always hers. But this time, he wasn't entirely hers anymore, and I could see the uncertainty in her eyes and the thrill in his. I knew at that moment that the dynamic had changed forever. I spent the rest of the evening in a careful dance of proximity. We laughed together when he pulled me aside for a silly dare. He teased me and brushed my arm lightly, and my chest tightened with every accidental touch. Later, as we left, I noticed him lingering outside longer than necessary, as if he didn't want to let the night end. I took a chance and leaned slightly closer. "Thanks for tonight," I murmured. He smiled back. "No, thank you," he said softly. "I had fun with you." That little phrase was enough to make me realize that I wasn't imagining it. He was starting to choose me in ways subtle and quiet but undeniable. I also realized this was dangerous territory, because if he noticed my intentions too clearly, it could backfire. Yet I couldn't stop myself from testing him further. Over the next few weeks, I orchestrated little moments that drew us closer accidentally on purpose, like spilling my coffee near his feet so he had to help me clean it up, or forgetting my notebook in the library so he would bring it to me in person. Every little interaction was a tiny step toward him noticing the real me and questioning why he had ever been so infatuated with Sabrina. The tension built to the point where I could see the flicker of something changing in his eyes every time we were together, like he was weighing the image of her against the reality of me. I felt the thrill of possibility coursing through me because finally, the impossible felt possible. Somewhere deep down, I knew that with just a little more patience and courage, I could make him fully reconsider what he thought he wanted, and maybe, just maybe, I could make him quit his old crush for me. It was one of those rare days when the campus felt almost empty, the kind of quiet that made every sound stand out. And I found myself walking with Jake toward the library again, a sense of nervous excitement twisting my stomach because I knew things were about to shift even more. He had started noticing little things about me that he hadn't before: the way I laughed at absurd jokes, the way I rolled my eyes at things I didn't like, the way I could get lost in conversation about nonsense and he would still hang on every word. And the more he noticed, the more I could see him comparing me silently to Sabrina. He had started seeking me out subtly, sitting at the table I usually chose, texting me first about mundane things like which snack to pick up or what playlist to listen to. And every time he did, my chest swelled with something I had never felt before: pride, hope, fear, and excitement all at once. But today felt different. There was a charged tension in the air, an unspoken energy that made my pulse race. We walked side by side, and I noticed him glancing at me more than usual, his eyes lingering in a way that was no longer casual. I caught him noticing my smile when I talked about a dumb little memory from high school, and he laughed the deep, warm laugh that made me melt. And I noticed a flicker of conflict in his gaze, like he was weighing the reality of me against the memory of Sabrina. And I felt a thrill because my presence was beginning to matter to him in a way it hadn't before. We entered the library together, and I suggested grabbing a table near the window for light. He agreed with a nod. The way he followed my lead without question made me realize he was starting to trust me, rely on me, and somewhere in that trust was the first seed of choice. I could feel it, subtle but undeniable. I noticed later that afternoon he kept his phone face down on the table, a small act but significant because I knew she had messaged him at least once and he hadn't checked. The quiet rejection of the familiar for the new presence of me was intoxicating and terrifying, and I wanted to push just enough without forcing him. I had learned the delicate balance of patience and subtle nudging over the last weeks. After studying a bit, we took a break and walked outside, the late afternoon sun warming our skin and giving everything a golden glow. He teased me about something I said, and I playfully shoved him. He caught my wrist lightly and didn't let go immediately. Our eyes met, and I could see it. A shift, recognition, a silent acknowledgement that he had begun to see me in a way that mattered, not just as a friend, as someone he wanted to notice more than anyone else. But the moment was interrupted when Sabrina appeared around the corner with her usual perfect smile. She waved at him casually, the kind of effortless charm that always seemed to work in her favor, but this time it faltered slightly. He waved back, but the energy was different. He didn't move toward her with the usual eagerness. Instead, he lingered near me, and I could see her hesitation, the imperfection in her response, and I felt a thrill of victory mixed with a twinge of guilt, because I knew I was becoming the reason for her uncertainty. Yet it wasn't intentional cruelty. It was simply the natural pull of reality over fantasy. She tried to strike up a conversation with him, but he responded with polite, clipped answers, glancing at me occasionally, and I noticed his hands fidgeting slightly, a small sign of internal struggle. I realized he was beginning to question his old feelings, the careful balance of what was familiar versus what was real, and I felt the thrill of possibility coursing through me. Every time we were together, he was weighing the image of her against the reality of me. We left the library later together and walked toward the campus coffee shop, our conversation easy, teasing, full of small shared jokes, and each time he smiled at me, I felt that thrill of knowing he was starting to choose me in his heart. I noticed he didn't glance at his phone, didn't mention her once. He was focused entirely on me. I felt a wave of exhilaration, a mix of disbelief and triumph. And somewhere deep inside, I knew we were teetering on the edge of something inevitable. Finally, as the afternoon light began to fade, he leaned back and looked at me seriously, a rare solemnity in his eyes. I don't know why, but being with you, it feels different, better. I can't stop thinking about you, he said softly, and I felt my chest constrict. His eyes searched mine for any sign of doubt or hesitation. I like you too, I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. He reached out, taking my hand in his, and it felt like a perfect fit, as if all the pieces of the puzzle were finally snapping together. I noticed Sabrina watching from a distance, her smile fading slightly, and I felt no guilt because this wasn't about hurting her, it was about honesty and choices. Finally, Jake was choosing reality over fantasy, and I had the thrill of knowing that the impossible was becoming possible, that the weeks of subtle nudges, shared laughs, and quiet moments were about to culminate in a choice that could change everything. The days that followed felt like walking on a knife's edge. Every glance, every laugh, every accidental brush of hands carried weight, and I knew the final step was coming. I could feel it in the way Jake lingered near me in classes, how he found excuses to text me first, and how he smiled differently when our eyes met across a crowded hallway. Sabrina's presence was unavoidable. She was still around, trying subtly to charm him, but he no longer responded the way he used to. He didn't lean in at her jokes or laugh at her teasing the same way, and I could see the flicker of hesitation across her face. She sensed it, even if she didn't fully understand it, and that gave me a strange mix of triumph and relief, because it wasn't about competition. It was about reality catching up to him and finally noticing what had been right in front of him all along. One Friday evening, the campus held a casual gathering at the student center. I debated whether to go because I wasn't sure if Sabrina would be there, but I knew I had to see this through. I wanted to witness the moment where everything shifted. I arrived and spotted Jake leaning against a wall across the room, his expression thoughtful. He noticed me instantly and walked over, smiling, but there was something different this time. He carried a quiet certainty. The playful hesitance from before had vanished. He greeted me warmly, and we slipped away to a quieter corner to talk. The music and noise faded into the background, and all I could see was him, and all I could feel was anticipation. I noticed him glance at the entrance and then back at me, and I knew Sabrina had arrived. She didn't approach immediately, but her presence was like a shadow hovering near the edge of the room, and I felt a pang of nervousness. But I steadied myself because this was the moment I had been building toward for weeks. The conversation flowed easily as usual, but then he paused, looked at me seriously, and said, "I need to be honest with you. I've been thinking a lot, and I realized something I didn't before." My heart raced, and I could barely breathe. "What is it?" I asked softly. "I like you more than I realized I could like anyone," he said, and I felt my chest tighten. His eyes searched mine for any sign of doubt or hesitation. "I don't think about her the same way anymore. It's like I finally see what matters. And it's you." I felt like the world had tilted. The impossible was suddenly tangible. The tension and uncertainty and weeks of careful steps and small victories had led to this moment. I smiled, trying to hide the tears forming in my eyes. "I like you too," I whispered, and he reached out, taking my hand in his, and it felt like a perfect fit, as if all the pieces of the puzzle were finally snapping together. I noticed Sabrina watching from a distance, her smile fading slightly, and I felt no guilt because this wasn't about hurting her. It was about honesty and choices, and finally, Jake was choosing me fully. Over the next few days, everything felt effortless. Our interactions became natural, full of warmth and laughter. We went to classes together, found little adventures around campus, and each time he smiled at me, I felt that thrill of knowing he had chosen me completely. He started opening up more about his feelings, sharing little fears, hopes, and dreams that he had never voiced before, and I listened and encouraged him. We were writing a new chapter together, one built on reality, trust, and authentic connection. Sabrina eventually faded from our orbit, and I didn't dwell on it because it wasn't necessary. What mattered was the bond that had grown between us. the choices made, and the thrill of the impossible becoming real. I never thought I could make someone quit an old crush for me, but through patience, subtle moments, and revealing my true self, I had done it. The impossible had become real, and it was breathtaking, exhilarating, and perfectly worth every small, calculated risk I had taken.